We will now begin with the second technical session of the fourth day, which is the 10th technical session of the workshop on the topic Modern Discovery and Authentication with Ebsco, OpenAthens, by Mr. Mike MacKinnon, who is the Director of SaaS Innovation, Ebsco Information Services. Mr. Mike has been working in technology for more than 16 years, with 13 of those years in the library industry. He was an early team member of ProQuest Summon and Intota products, and an original contributor for Plum Analytics in the research analytics and engagement space. For the past 5 years at Ebsco, he has worked with Ebsco's SaaS, native and partner services, and currently focuses on Ebsco's support of Folio, an open source community-driven LSP. Consistent across all his roles, Mr. Mike has had the challenge to work with new-to-market services. Summon was the first single centrally indexed discovery tool to market. Plum Analytics was the first robust research impact measurement tool to include not just social media metrics, but usage, citation, news impacts, and more. And Folio is the first microservices ILS platform in the library industry.
Okay, my name is Mike MacKinnon, and I'm with Ebsco Information Services. I'd like to give special thanks to Dr. Srikumar and the opportunity to present to you today on Digitally Robust Research Libraries Conference for Discovery Services. And I'm going to talk a little bit about authentication as well, especially considering that authentication is part and parcel with the discovery process, particularly from a patron's usability standpoint. We want to make sure that they have seamless access, they can authenticate and have access to all the items that they search for and discover. So we're going to cover a little bit of both of these services. And then I'll wrap up with some kind of closing thoughts on other things around digitally robust research libraries that libraries may consider as they look towards the future of services they deploy. So the schedule, the agenda that I've put together here in this session is really to review the purposes of discovery services, the landscape of where we've come from to the landscape that exists today. We'll talk about Ebsco's discovery service drivers, what we do when we deliver functionality, when we build roadmaps around discovery services based on library feedback. The resultants, if you will, a new EDS, the Ebsco Discovery Service design. So we're going to show some screenshots around feature functionality that we've brought into EDS. And then again, lastly, I'll close on authentication, looking at some authentication workflows, not only for librarians as they manage access, but also for patrons when they come into libraries and they run a search and then they try to authenticate. All of that would be something that would be valuable for patron experiences. So purposes of discovery, where do we start from? Why did we get here? What are discovery services in general, and how are they deployed worldwide today? Modern, digitally robust libraries, almost all part and parcel use discovery services as part of their toolkit. It's no longer just about the OPAC. And this is because of an evolution of digital content and digital access. Way back from the 1980s, as libraries were originally getting access to content within the library, you had items in the stacks, your physical collections, you had some digital tools as well, maybe that's microfiche, microfilm. You had some repositories, although that wasn't a bunch of stuff beyond scans, I suppose, at that point. Maybe some digitization initiatives of archives. So you had some digital items, but most of those were still cataloged. You still would create a bibliographic record. You would still enter that record into your catalog. If you had unfortunately still using a card catalog maybe, and you were modernizing into a platform service, you were still largely bound by the catalog. From a patron's perspective, that means they're still bound by the OPAC. What they're searching for and how they search really depended upon the records entered in the ILS. You had to have items that were searchable, so your abstracts needed to be pretty complete, or your subject terms needed to be pretty complete. Your librarians themselves often a lot of your staff were catalogers or had experience with cataloging. So this really was driving library access to content, the ability to enter and describe data in your catalog. Well, around about middle of 1990s, we had the launch of Google, and the early 90s, I suppose, you had the launch of the internet. But then with the launch of Google, just became this landslide of free access, digital access for everyone, everywhere. You could go on to Google and you could search across anything, essentially. And that really kind of opened the doors as to how libraries might get past servicing patrons through just the bibliographic descriptive record. You would be able to digitize items and have them display publicly online. That might actually promote search and access beyond libraries that come into the library to use the OPAC directly. They could now get access via the web. You could post a library website, which you couldn't do before. And people outside of the library could actually do searching. They could find items, and not necessarily place holds or any of that kind of stuff yet. But you could still find items. Hey, does my local library have X book on the shelf? So really started to enable a larger scope of users for each library, whether that was academic or if that was public. It didn't matter your access point. Really just the scope of use started to expand quite heavily with the breadth of the internet and open web searching. Then in the 2000s, we really started to say, okay, well, we're going way beyond digitization. So we're only 5 years past the breadth of World Wide Web adoption. And we're really starting to say, hey, digitization of content and digital content packages around specific disciplines or specific topic areas is now getting more prominent. We can provide digital services to patrons at large and have library collections no longer take up so much physical space and require so much physical activity or work around, book jobbers, or if I need to, put items back in the stacks and manage circulation. Well, that's a much larger lift than supporting digital resources. The lift in digital is more about, do I have the right resources and are they licensed and accessible? So it's still a much easier access point, a lower barrier of entry to provide digital services than it was necessarily for your physical collections. And in turn, because of the lower barrier of entry, you actually had huge growth in library usage of resources. So we weren't even, at this point, capturing data around how is my library being used and how is our spend being met. None of those data elements were drivers in library thinking yet, because we didn't really have a catalyst, something that said, I really need to shift to support where my users are coming from. I didn't need a data driver there. I just simply knew that I was managing my library collection. So as digital access grew and physical collections started shifting to digital, really we started saying, hey, there's a lot more that we need to understand about how the library services patrons. And a big part of that was around the digital push for databases and digital access points. And then in 2010, we had Discovery Services launch. And Discovery Services, I think maybe 03, 04, around that databases element, the prior one, we had Federated Search. And if you remember, Federated Search was about creating connectors to specific databases. So you could do a single search that would run that search query into each database. But the federated searching itself wasn't essentially great. You would have connectors time out. You would have connectors provide only truncated result sets. Nothing had similar relevancy algorithms. It was very siloed still in nature. And while it was an improvement over manually searching each database, it still wasn't as good as Discovery Services ultimately can deliver. So in 2010, we had the launch of Discovery Services in the library industry. And really, the driver there is getting past federated search, where I'm still in the database silo thinking, and moving those collections to be offered by databases and providers, aggregators, etc. But then being able to index all of those resources into a central index so that one query can run past all of the results in a very short amount of time, so you don't have to worry about timing out, provide consistent relevancy algorithms so you have consistent weighting of items coming back, whether that's because of full text or if that's because of abstracts. And so publisher A maybe has better metadata than publisher B, so you get more relevant results that way. All of these things were benefits to librarians for managing their collection and getting better data-driven usage, but also better for patrons, where patrons themselves had easier access to all content that the library offered, no matter having to go or not having to learn to go to each database in particular. They could go to one central search resource and they could search across the whole library's collection in a single query, which is fantastic. And that's honestly the experience that they were familiar with, you know, from back 1994. You're seeing, you know, 20 years on there. Well, not 20 years, 15 years on. They're learning from that experience over time, and they're expecting the library to deliver in the same way. And so in 2010, we are finally delivering on that experiences informed in the mid-90s around open web searching. Okay, so when you look at a library from an administrative side, how do libraries themselves compartmentalize collections without discovery services? Well, the reality is that it's a higher barrier of entry for all participants in this ecosystem, whether it's the librarian for managing collections, so validating each database has the ability to authenticate and make search queries, and I don't have to know Boolean, and I can go ahead and I can find the items that I'm after. Or maybe I have staff who are library staff who are expert researchers in particular databases, and they become go-to for particularly, you know, academic faculty who have specific needs, or researchers who have specific needs. These research professionals know how to query very specific databases. Well, it still silos their ability to manage libraries at large and across all of the collections that libraries offer, really compartmentalizes them. Patrons similarly have, you know, smaller opportunities to engage with library content across the spectrum. They have to learn these siloed ecosystems of content searching, discoverability, and content access. So this multiple search platform is problematic. This is something that discovery services were designed to fix. If I think of myself as getting shared resources from a consortia, or my licensed resource from a primary publisher in a database package, or maybe I have open access collections, or we're talking about the bibliographic items on the shelves, all of these areas without a central search like Discovery Service become very point and search elements that any single patron might miss, right? If I'm going to come in and look for some particular STEM resource, I may only target STEM databases and not actually see what's available in open access collections, or what's on my shelf, or what's in a repository or archive, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a big barrier of entry for patrons, and it's a big barrier of management for libraries to do this. And then lastly, that point on the left, the low usage, low statistics, it becomes really problematic to manage how our are content collections being used? Even if I get data points, it's hard to then compare one data point from one resource to another, particularly if different faculty in like a information engagement sequence from, say, library staff with department faculty and how they teach students, that type of engagement might enable one content resource over another one. And so the data collection, the downstream effects of how much use is content A getting versus content B is really problematic to compare, because there's no central point of aligning those two data drivers, if you will. So with discovery services, a lot of that goes out the window. You have a central point for all patrons to come in and run a search query against, where any item that is indexed or represented now can have that query applied against it. Just as if, you know, our experience in the open web going to Google, my expectation is that I'm going to be able to search for really anything available on the web. This could be things from reports to newspapers to blogs to etc., video, you name it. Anything out there, I expect Google to really solve for if it's available on the open web. Well, in the library, my expectation is similar. If I run a search query in a discovery service in the library, I expect to be able to find licensed collections, shared consortial collections, open access resources, my physical stacks, everything that is available, I expect to be able to find. So then it becomes a workflow improvement, actually, for the library, in that all their job primarily is then is to make sure that their collection is represented in the discovery service. Are my books being loaded into the discovery service index? Is my licensed package from provider A, is that turned on in the knowledge base that is powering the index? Are my open access resources also enabled, or do I need to maybe get a bibliographic record and load those if it's from, say, a smaller local or regional publisher, et cetera? Do I need to load those in the index? So that becomes a workflow improvement. My mission, my job, if you will, becomes very straightforward. I don't have to have searching expertise in resource A versus resource B, and I don't have to maintain different workflows for different parts of the library collection. I can have it all distilled down to one primary role, making sure that the discovery service has everything that I want to be searchable by patrons. This also means the downstream effects of data gathering are much more easy to compare against. So I can do analytics on search queries. What are people actually searching for? I could do analytics on, say counter reports on my ebooks or my databases or my journals. I can do this type of access across the landscape because they're all having central access points of discovery or my A to Z lists, et cetera. There's a lot of parity in searchability, which means the metrics downstream should also be able to be compared against each other, which helps quite a lot. And I suppose, you know, in this slide here too, something I didn't really mention is that this actually really helps for the off-site user as well. If you think about the prior model without discovery services, off-campus, off-site users generally get distilled into your digital resources only. And while they may find items in the stacks, the likelihood of them saying, yeah, I want to place a hold and please distribute that to me, or circulate that to me to a pickup location, or whatever that is, it's actually pretty low for offsite users. Most user behavior studies that we have show that offsite users dramatically more prioritize digital access resources than they do any other kind of collection. So discovery services help in that regard, that they seamlessly provide weighting across all of it, and there's less of a driver for them to prioritize one content resource over the other. They'll just prioritize the most relevant, which is great. Okay, so when I look at discovery services in general, if I understand now the importance of what a discovery service is and its role in the library, now I need to determine what is important in the discovery service. So I know that I need to make sure that everything in my content or everything in my collection is indexed in the service. That's what we're pushing all of our patrons towards. That's what we're pushing our workflow towards. It's how we're deriving a lot of our data drivers around collection, licensing, and usage. We just need to make sure all of that's in the index. So beyond that, how do you make determinations about what's valuable in an index? Well, again, we want to make sure everything is in there. So the quality and depth and breadth of what's being searched is really important. This means that brief records really are less helpful, particularly if somebody's just doing keyword searching and they're not looking for like a known item. Well, if there's a very, very brief abstract and there's not very much subject metadata and the details of the record are pretty sparse, then that query doesn't have a whole lot of elements to apply to a relevancy algorithm. So the item itself will score pretty low, and the likelihood of a patron finding that item against other items that have more robust records is going to be pretty tough. So what we're looking for is discovery services that do a lot of enrichment of records, right? We want, obviously, to have publisher records, provider records be robust to begin with. But beyond that, we know that that's not always the case. So what can we do when looking and evaluating discovery services? What can we do with prioritizing a discovery service that enriches records as well? And that's certainly something that libraries need to consider. So now if we assume we have a rich record and we're comparing rich record A versus rich record B, these robust, enriched records, we need to make sure that the relevancy algorithms is still yielding the right results. So doing things like search term frequency or search term proximity, or is one field in a bibliographic record more important than another field? Are item types important in a relevancy scoring? So maybe I want to have more ebook results and not ebook reviews as a result, just from an item type. So these types of relevancy scoring weightings become important for you to understand. If you're evaluating a discovery service and you don't know the relevancy scoring algorithm, if it's not transparent, then that might be something for you to consider asking that vendor. I need to know how you score relevancy. It's important for you to understand how items are returned, because ultimately, if the scoring is good, then you will, as a library, get the most relevant result coming back, and the most academic, at least in the context of academic institutions, the most academic result as well, because you're licensing, the academic institutions are licensing scholarly material by and large, which means that the results that come back will be scholarly in nature. So if we know that the search queries are good and we know that the records behind them are robust, we need to make sure that it doesn't confuse the user too. We don't want them to come into the service that has high value drivers behind it and then walk away because of usability. So making sure that we meet usability standards, not only from testing patrons, but also that there's parity between library service experiences and open web services. So things that they're very familiar with, they don't have to come in and learn something new, is really important. We want them to be able to adopt a discovery service and not have to go through a training manual to do so. It needs to be intuitive, it needs to be familiar, it needs to be effective. So looking at the discovery service from a UX perspective is also very important. We need to make sure that that discovery service has the ability to integrate with other tools across the library landscape. Of course, things like your learning management systems, course reserve systems. We need to make sure that all functions for faculty to be able to provide items to students in their curriculum, and they can go ahead and use the library services to get those items for them. We also want to engage with other services, whether that's chat services or bookmarklets or citation resources. There's a huge gamut of integrations that need to happen. Never mind integrations with like your ILS in the background that's providing the bibliographic data, or integrations with licenses and agreement tools that help manage copyright, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of integrations are required for discovery services to be effective. And then we're going to talk about this later, is about the ability to support linking and authentication, part and parcel. So if we've done everything else so far really great, and we've done searching and the usability is fantastic, and we provide all the integrations required, and they can't get access, then what was the point in everything else we just did? So we really need to make sure that we deliver on the ability to seamlessly sign on and seamlessly get access to that content too. And then of course, qualifications and commitment by the staff. This is just about the vendor validation, making sure that your vendor is supportive of the library needs. Really, there are a handful of discovery service vendors out there, and even less of them have authority knowledge bases empowering them. So you're really wanting to make sure that the vendor that you select is an appropriate vendor for discovery. Okay, so looking at the indexing of resources, and I spoke about this, as the very first thing we talked about in evaluating discovery, and that is the quality, breadth, and depth of the records behind it. Well, a lot of what I mentioned was enriching resources. Remember, where if you get a brief record, it's not always the case that the records are robust. So if you get a brief record, how do we enrich a brief record such that it's still discoverable by patrons and then able to be stored amongst a slew of other resources and then get access? Well, a lot of what happens in this process is making sure that those results are from scholarly sources anyway. Particularly in the academic space, where scholarly subscription resources need to be indexed. And if you have collections that aren't already indexed, getting those items in and then enriching them via, say, subject level metadata mapping or bridges to authority control terms, we're really making sure that records themselves are able to be scored and weighted highly with robust metadata behind it. When looking at it from an Ebsco lens, Ebsco does a lot of this in our own index. We have very specific tools that help us bridge controlled vocabularies from, say, provider A to provider B, where they may use different terms, but they mean the same subject discipline, or they mean the same area, the ontology of that space, that subject matter. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that the patrons don't have to figure that out. We want to do the same type of mapping, where if somebody's searching for teaching aids, I know that Eric uses teaching aids, but Medline does not. I want to make sure that teaching materials, you can see that in the second item there, it says teaching and teaching materials versus teaching aids in Eric in the beginning, that both items come back in a result set because they are in the same discipline area. So enriching records to make them more searchable is really important in evaluating discovery. We also want to make sure that these terms themselves, oh, look, I even already covered it here, are mapped to that same controlled vocabulary. So if I am searching specific vocabs, maybe I'm an information specialist or I am a faculty member, I still want to be able to see both too. It's not just about solving for the general search term of patrons, it's about solving for both. I want to solve for your undergrads, your non-info specialists, and I also want to solve for researchers, graduate students, faculty, where they can find items of both that are relevant. And then applying a relevancy scoring such that the right items, the most relevant items, come to the top of the list. Really, this is what's called subject precision, and the ability to make sure that within a result set of, say, 10,000 or 100,000 records, that the right items come to the first 10 in a results set, because most patrons aren't going to scroll or go to the second page. They're looking for items that come right up to the top. And by doing that, we're looking for specific field weighting. We heavily weight subject terms within the Ebsco Discovery Service, because we not only do a lot of subject term enrichment, but we also know that the primary publishers that Ebsco works with, that we index resources from, those primary publishers also do a lot of work around subject terms, both controlled vocabularies, as well as if it's not a controlled vocabulary, simply adding the right subject discipline information into the metadata. That all helps in discoverability. So we want to heavily weight subject. Then from there, we want to make sure that we're looking on a title, and we want to look for author, and we want to look for very specific fields within the bibliographic record where the search query might actually be present. Most of the time, that's because a lot of people have in mind what they're searching for, and having that show up in a title or in an author is usually a pretty good guess as to the item that they're after. Is it's got that in the title name, or if they're searching by an author, they're not looking for associative authors, they're looking for that author or even a co-author. So we're looking for these specific fields. And then, of course, we want to go further down, looking within the abstract, looking within the full text, looking at the item type, search term frequency, search term proximity, and we want to do all of this weighting to provide a scoring for each item as it comes up to a result set. Now, if you didn't know, quick tip, Ebsco actually provides our relevancy algorithm publicly. So you're welcome to go to Google and search for Ebsco Discovery Service Relevancy Algorithm, and you'll find it listed in the Ebsco support pages. Not all vendors do this. There's some that are a little bit less transparent around that. For us, we really think that you need to know why items come up to the top, and that's part of our transparency. So looking at EDS across the gamut of services, you license a lot of resources. Some of them are primary publishers, some of them may be shared. You actually may have a lot of open access resources or special collections or repositories or archives, the items on your shelves, et cetera, et cetera. You've got a lot of stuff. But we want to make sure that discovery is a great experience. It's not only for you as a management tool to manage your collections and get the most out of your collections, but also a great experience for your patrons so that they come back to the library. They're not driven away. They're not driven to the open web. They get results that help them in their requirement, whether that's curriculum work that they need or research work. We want to make sure that we're delivering on patron expectations too. So there's a lot of built-in functionality for librarians on the back end in the administrative environment, whether that's the ability to customize, to do integrations, managing your collection in the knowledge base, or setting up custom linking. And there's lots of things that we can do for patron experiences as well, whether that's custom links out to full text, saving items, citing items, creating projects and dashboards so that they can manage different projects by saving items into different projects. Because we all know that most of our students don't just take one coursework, they have lots of different courses and lots of projects to manage. And even research professionals, they too typically manage lots of different projects. So being able to have a dashboard to manage that within Discovery helps quite a bit. And then, of course, share all of that out or get easy access to them. We want to deliver on that for the user. So in that vein, I'm going to go through some of the particular features of our new EDS, Ebsco Discovery Service design elements. If you haven't already seen some webinars from Ebsco on the new EDS UX, then there's plenty out there, but we're happy, obviously, to do a follow-up there. The new Ebsco Discovery Service launched officially at the beginning of this calendar year, so in January this calendar year, libraries can adopt it at their own pace. So if you have particular functional requirements that maybe aren't met yet because it's a brand new design and refresh, and some of the design refresh and some of the elements from the classic version of EDS maybe haven't pulled over yet. So if you have particular requirements, maybe wait some, but it's up to you in how you want to move on to new EDS. The timing is available for you today, as available as in January. So you've seen some of the screenshots, by the way. Put some of these into the slides where you're seeing the patron bar on the left that gives me information about my dashboard, my accounts, custom target linking if I need to for the library to point to particular resources, and more. I'm gonna go through several of these features today. So first, how users search. If I run a search query here, you see the queries for digital marketing. You'll notice I get a couple placards on the top, and I get a lot of easy access filters and facets to help me on my search. I can actually search by particular types there. I can search by online only full text. I could even just quickly flag items for peer review. I could go into the advanced search button there on the right and do some advanced searching. When I look at the first result set as it comes on the screen, you notice I'm given a couple placards. One is an exact match to a title we have in our content collection. So a journal for digital marketing. That was the search query, digital marketing. We got an exact match for something that we subscribe to as a library, so I want to show it to the patron. But we also got that research starter on the right, that other element there that says, hey, are you looking for items in the digital marketing space? Are you curious about what digital marketing is? And it gives a little background as to what the digital marketing material may look like, what its respective area of collections are. And this helps me then as a patron better understand why the results are coming back the way they are, is because this is the type of material digital marketing represents. Then I have my result sets down below. And in my result sets, I can go ahead and do quite a bit of things. So I can click into an item and get right to the full text, that Access Now button on the left there. I could cite this by clicking those three dots and go to a little cite dropdown. I could favorite this and like this item to make sure that I come back and I see that this item is something that is relevant. Maybe I haven't distilled it down to say a top 10 or top 12 items that I want to use for my project. So I'm just going to tag it for now with a like. So I can like this item as a result. And did it not? From there, I actually can go ahead and use some of these UX elements and bring it into my own dashboards. So here I found a particular detail on digital marketing, and I'm going to go ahead and look at what this is as a supplemental resource. So this was a static link on the left as a supplemental resource that allows me as a library to engage something that may not be centrally indexed. So if it's not indexed already, but I still want to point patrons to it, I can point via this supplemental resource dashboard. This allows me to maybe promote things that aren't necessarily good in discovery, meaning if I have collections that are, say, for instance, like maps or items that don't have a lot of robust metadata, I can still point users to resources that we curate as a library by adding them to the supplemental sources material. My dashboard here, this is kind of a funky slide, but the dashboard isn't trivial. There's a lot of functionality in the dashboard. It allows me to create projects and manage my projects, to create alerts around projects. So if I have a project coming due soon, It will help set up an alert that needs to, hey, did you know this project's coming up on the 1st of April? You really probably need to come back and review this project. I can set up a workflow that lets me as a patron continue to come back to the library. I can look at the saved items that I've saved. I can look at my previous searches. So maybe I want to continue a search that I started before. And I can do all of that right within my EDS dashboards. I can even go into this holds and checkouts area and look at like loan history if I wanted to. So lots of functionality in the dashboard for a patron, which would be very helpful for me to continue to leverage the library as my research priority when I am engaging in anything that I need to do, in my academia versus going to, say, the open web. This provides me a valuable opportunity to come back and leverage my workflow within the library search environment. Of course, EDS is responsive design. The idea that modern services today really wouldn't be is pretty dated. I think most services today are, and so of course EDS is too. In fact, a lot of times what you'll see, at least maybe for me particularly, you'll see that patrons juggle services, right? If I'm going to go walk a library space, or I look at some of our patron studies, a lot of them have one window open that's maybe the library page and another window open looking at something else. And so sometimes these windows share spaces. The requirements to maybe change window sizing or to be mobile if I'm in an off-site location and I just want to look up something really quick to see if the library has it. We really want to make sure that EDS is mobile compliant. And I haven't really touched on this at all, but it's a nice enrichment of late. This is a recent service from EDS, and that is leveraging all of the authority metadata work we do around subject terms and enhanced subject precision, this bridging of subject ontologies that the Ebsco editorial teams do with records that we receive from publishers and open access and everything else. We do this enrichment of all collections so that records that come into the index can all be equally discovered. But using that then metadata and applying NLP, the natural language processing, we can actually create correlations between the different subject areas and then create relationships in a visual so that you can see what is a relationship between one area of a subject discipline and how it may relate to 1, 2, 10 other different areas that maybe aren't readily intuitive. So if I'm going to search for, say, a disorder, you can see it there on the screen in the middle, but I go from disorder to something else, maybe something like war or Ukraine or things that are topical, and I want to see what's happening here around these related terms. Well, the concept map allows me to do that. It allows me to bridge those together, and then I can actually bring that concatenated term. I can bring that back into discovery and see what items resulted from bridging these subject areas, these discipline areas together. Ebsco also has a mobile app. So if you haven't already used it on iOS or Android, I encourage you to go out and get the Ebsco mobile app. It will offer for you to do FMO, the Find My Organization. So if I download the app today and I open the app and I try to sign in, it will say, hey, where are you from? And it will point me to identifying my institutional affiliation. Now, I can sign into that. And if my library only subscribes to one resource from Ebsco, then that will be the one resource that shows up in my result sets. I won't get access to a bunch of things out of it. If my library subscribes to EDS, the discovery service, I can actually search across everything enabled in my discovery service via the app. So it isn't just Ebsco resources. It will show up for everything enabled in my EDS environment. So I get both. I don't have two separate apps. I get both in one app, all depending upon the settings of the library, what they currently have in their environment. Lots of different usability features in here as well. If you haven't used it, again, I encourage you to do so because it's so easy to get access down to the full text and then use that full text. Not just the searching that we're all familiar with that we've already reviewed around enrichment and metadata and the search terms themselves being relevance scored, and then finding items that are good for what I'm after, but the ability to actually quickly get to reading and accessing the items is really fantastic in the mobile environment. Now, subscriptions to the Ebsco Discovery Service do include services like an A to Z list. And the A to Z list is not just supporting keyword searching. You could browse by disciplines. You can browse by subject areas. I could browse by resource if I wanted to. But I can do searching within there. I could do known item searching, or I could just do keyword searching. But I can search for items within there. I could do just sorting if I want to browse A to Z, or if I want to do filtering for specific areas, then I could do that all too. Very straightforward A to Z list for everything enabled in your knowledge base. And included, by the way, in your Ebsco Discovery Service subscription. Now, we haven't touched really on compliance at all, but there's a lot of things going on in the Ebsco Discovery Service for compliance. Of course, you know, ISO 27001, we want to make sure we comply with that. We want to make sure we comply with GDPR, and we do. But we also want to comply with other NISO standards for platforms in our space. LTI compliance for learning management services and the integration of Canvas, Moodle, Blackboard, and D2L. Those are all things we support. So if you are using a learning management service today or a copyright management service today, and not listed on here is eReserve. We support eReserve. We support Talus Aspire for reading lists. You know, lots of different LTI compliant engagement is fully there in EDS today. So if I am a faculty member and I'm wanting to add collections to my curriculum, my coursework, I can easily do that and connect EDS to the tool that my library is already using, as long as it's LTI compliant. I listed a bunch that are, but if you have a tool that I haven't listed, that's okay. As long as it's LTI compliant, we can go ahead and set that up for your institution and make sure that you can search across the content and collections available in EDS. Okay, so lots of coverage there on discovery, why it's important, how we got to where we are, some feature functionality, and then access with both mobile and access with compliance for other integrations. Lots of coverage there. Part of the discovery narrative, though, part of the story behind what makes discovery great is the ability to authenticate and to get access. So access from, say, like an open URL compliant linking, of course, EDS does that. In fact, included in your subscription to EDS is a line item for full text finder, the open URL link resolver from Ebsco. And we want to make sure that you have a seamless linking experience. If you have other open URL link resolvers that you'd like to use as well, that's also possible. EDS works with any open URL compliant link resolver, that's fine. But authentication is really a whole nother story, right? If I look at the landscape of authentication, it's really, for a long time, it's been rather static. But it hasn't been viewed in the way that it should, and that is that access is part of discovery. It's a separate service, but libraries need to value it highly. We can't just look at it as, yeah, we got this proxy service off in the closet and it's locally hosted and we have, you know, one sysadmin check on it once a year, or maybe I update some rights to it. I load a new file for it and I deal with, maybe I even ignore my log data, I don't know. But the proxy services have largely been neglected and put off to the side as not integral to the user experience. And when we survey libraries, particularly academic libraries, we find that that's actually not the case. Academic libraries have less and less IT resources. They have higher requirement around privacy and security. And so these two don't match up, right? They don't have IT administrators. They don't have the ability to, largely ignore GDPR any longer. And proxy is not private. Proxy is not secure. And most authentication, breakthroughs, if you will, security breaches are through proxy. So, most breaches in the library domain are through proxy, and that's because it's a simple username and password. It's session-based info. That's not private in any way. So what we're trying to see, or what we're noting to see, or not trying to see, what we're noting across libraries is that libraries as a whole are moving towards SAML. So this focus on personalized access is great, in that there's a lot of single sign-on, not same sign-on, but single sign-on for personalized, seamless access. But SAML is secure as well. SAML stands for Security Assertion Markup Language. It's the same protocols used for identity service providers, like your Active Directory for Microsoft or your Shibboleth servers for IDP management. It's the same requirement protocol used within VPNs. So the idea that proxies have been okay is largely not the case anymore. Libraries and publishers, providers, are all moving to SAML if they haven't, already. In addition to that, we also see that library requirements around analytics and understanding who's getting access by creating groups of cohorts, groups of users, is also becoming more common. So you have less IT staff, higher requirements around security and privacy, and higher requirements around reporting and access. So it's difficult for libraries. It's challenging to meet this need, right? They need to be SAML. They need to have analytics to show that they're getting return on investment for their collections, and yet they don't have IT staff. So in this narrative, proxy has had a lot of challenges. If you've been to any of the conferences, I know with the COVID pandemic, it's been very challenging to have in-person meeting and conferences. A lot of those have been virtual, but if you've been to some of them, you will have seen that proxy services actually get questioned about when is my proxy going to support SAML. We know that NISO has adopted SAML as its recommendation to libraries and to providers. So proxy services themselves are getting some pushback. That is because it looks like this. And this is a whole lot of arrows, and apologies if this is confusing. But the landscape of users, that they're going to come in from a service, a system, my laptop, my phone, my desktop, whatever. And the proxy service is simply going to say, is this person able to be authenticated, yes or no? And it doesn't actually, I suppose, obfuscate anything about me as a individual. It instead lets me pass through with my IP, and that IP can later be spoofed. So this, and the username and password often, which we've seen at particular resources, often isn't hidden, it's right in the string, which is sometimes shocking. But this transparency becomes easy for places like Sci-Hub to go ahead and steal authentication credentials and then authenticate and harvest content from different publisher domains. So this is something that libraries need to be part of in adopting something that is the NISO recommendation of SAML. If you haven't paid attention to NISO, and the RA21 initiative. The RA21 initiative actually had 3 full measures in it. One was particularly focused around the academic space. Another was focused around corporates, particularly for those on-site, on-premise authentication practices for corporate environments. And then the third initiative was all-encompassing, and it included publishers and providers as well as libraries. So there's these 3 different veins, if you will, around RA21. But all of them pointed towards SAML as the go-to. This is because there was already a landscape of services for identity management that were on SAML, that were proven to be secure. And the links in the chain were simply broken at proxy. And improving proxy to SAML compliance is the most direct way to be private and secure and compliant with some of the larger initiatives globally. So publishers have moved to RA21, whether this is MFA, the multi-factor authentication, but you can see on the bottom there, SAML and Shibboleth being part of federations that support SAML are also important. There's a couple of them that do, OpenAthens being one of them. So what is OpenAthens? This is really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, where we get our traction to fix breaking the privacy and security loop there around proxy, and that is moving to OpenAthens. OpenAthens is the only authentication tool in the library industry today, the only tool that natively supports SAML. So the way that this works is if a target, an accessing target, a service provider is what they call it in the OpenAthens federated network, is SAML compliant, then a patron's credentials will be SAML. They will be private, they will be secure. This has both the publisher that they're trying to get access to the content, and this has the place that they started from, right? So if you're at the library and you've signed in at the library, you've done some searching and you want to link out to a resource, this part is SAML if that library is using OpenAthens, and then it links out to a federated platform, that Elsevier example of they're also on SAML compliant. That's a secure access. If a publisher or provider is not SAML compliant, if they're still proxy, so maybe a smaller publisher, a provider that's not part of the OpenAthens Federation, or is not part of the InCommon Federation, or is not part of the EduGain Federation, if it's just a regional smaller place, they might be in proxy, that's fine. OpenAthens will start SAML in the same workflow we just described, where the patron logs in at the library, they run some searches, they find an item they like, they're still SAML at the library. But then when they go out to that publisher resource attempting to get access, it will attempt to authenticate via SAML. If it can't, because the publisher isn't SAML, then it will dumb down to proxy. So this opportunity of access doesn't deprive patrons of actually getting to the item. We want them to get to the item, but we want them to get the item SAML if possible. So we prioritize SAML, and then when it's not SAML, we can lower the security and privacy down to IP if required. But because they authenticate, because they originated at the library, this whole process, or maybe they originated at home, but they authenticated into the library's OpenAthens service. This whole process now becomes a single sign-on, becomes SSO. And it doesn't even have to go into the library as an originating point. Let me make sure that's clear. So if I am a research faculty member and I'm at home or I'm offsite and I'm still doing some research, I may start at Google Scholar. I may search for something on nanotechnology or whatever that may be. And if I find a result that is interesting to me, maybe I'm at ResearchGate and I find a result that's interesting to me, I click on it for access and I authenticate Well, if I authenticate with my institutional credentials, I'm still on the publisher platform, but I've authenticated with my institutional credentials for OpenAthens. Then I will have an OpenAthens token in my session, in my browsing session. So in my Chrome or in my Firefox, I'll have a token embedded in my session that now allows me to use my OpenAthens anonymized ID that stores my session as a permissible session no matter where I go. So if I never go to the library at all, but I authenticated at one point with my institutional credentials against an OpenAthens identity authentication tool, now I can use that token everywhere, from that Google Scholar example to the ResearchGate example to anywhere I go. I can continue to use my embedded token because it's in my browser. But also note that this doesn't provide any ability to spoof or to have my credentials stolen from me. So much more private and secure and still seamless access. From an administrative side, deploying OpenAthens actually improves a lot of what you have to do around managing users. Don't have to manage logs anymore or do a lot of auditing of logs. I can actually create patron attributes. Things like, is this a faculty member? Is this a graduate student? Is this an undergrad? Maybe even more granular attributes. What department are they in? They're in the chemistry department. Or maybe this group over here is from the law library. So I can create attributes around users, and now I can align resources to those groups of users. So think for a moment, if let's say I do have multiple libraries. I've got a main library and I've got a law library. And maybe in my law library, I license LexisNexis. Well, I could actually assign LexisNexis access just to users with the law library attribute. That means that only those users will have access to the LexisNexis resource. For me as a library, that means I'm providing the resource to the right group of users, but I'm also lowering my costs because now I can provide that user count towards that very specific resource on a licensing basis. So now when I communicate with LexisNexis, for instance, I can say, hey, our FTE for the law library is only this number over here versus my whole campus. So it allows me more granular management, but also better management of my library collections and my users. Now I also get some analytics. I'm going to show you a couple screenshots of those. And I get the ability to manage or audit authentication. So if there are what looks like fictitious users, or there is lots of downloads in a particular short time frame, well, OpenAthens has some automatic functionality that will flag user accounts, but it allows me the ability to manage individual users rather than maybe turning off that full resource for the whole campus. So better management of my resources and my user base. So how does this work? Well, if I am a patron and I'm coming in on any one of my devices, it's going to, if I start, say if I go right to a publisher and I try to sign into a publisher, or I go to the institution itself, the library itself, it will actually have me authenticate there at that institution, and then validating that authentication access will say, yes, they are a member, and we're going to go ahead and provide that token back to that browser session, allowing me then to go ahead and get single sign-on access to any access point that I get during this whole process. And during this, none of this information is conveyed anywhere, that it's not able to be stolen or spoofed in any way. So to sum up, we want to have libraries move to SAML. We think there's better management, better security, personalization, and just a better experience, and better for the library itself to manage your collections. How it looks on the back end. So a very modern design, UI design, where you can manage accounts, you can manage resources themselves, you can set permissions tables for resources, so you can see on the right how many different groups of users are aligned to different resources, and identity profiles within, say, an identity tool like an Active Directory or something else. So for instance, that second one down, the adjunct faculty, they have 45 resources turned on for this manager profile, and there's 106 people that are in this adjunct faculty group. So I can align this attribute to resources and profiles of users. And then I could track that. So if I wanted to look at the adjunct faculty usage, I could track that at a attribute level, or I could just look holistically to say, what are those 45 resources across that group? How are they being used across my institution? I can do this over a period of time. I could do year-over-year comparisons. I could compare this at a publisher or service provider level. I can do lots of different analytics there for access analytics. So lots of good stuff. Helps me as a librarian manage access, provides a better experience for the patrons, a more private and secure experience as well. Okay, so I've covered quite a bit with discovery, with access for authentication, and now I want to just do a couple supplementary thoughts as we close. Recognizing I'm coming up on about an hour or so, a couple supplementary thoughts as we close out. First, I know that during this process of digitally robust libraries that we're covering Folio as well. I'm sure Sebastian Hammer is going to do a great job of that. But I want to make sure that you know that Folio, because of its modularity, libraries actually could be engaged with Folio as an ERM tool as well. So if you are an EDS library, an Ebsco Discovery Service library already, well, you already manage your collections in the Ebsco knowledge base. That knowledge base can be connected to a Folio environment. And now you can manage your licenses, your agreements, your organizations, and how all of that feeds into discovery or your A to Z lists. You can manage all of that from a Folio ERM and not have to necessarily do your circulation or your user management or your acquisitions workflows. You can keep that, in your traditional workflows today, your traditional ILS today. You can start on ERM and you can get your workflows for your larger e-resource footprint in Folio today and manage that for discovery. The fact that it's powered by the Ebsco KB actually helps you a lot, not only because of size and scope, but because of workflows. So if you're already on the Ebsco Discovery Service, you're already used to going into the knowledge base, you're used to enabling collections for discovery, for full text finder, for your linking, for publication finder, your A to Z list. You're used to enabling collections there anyway. Well, by doing that into a Folio ERM environment, you now actually can just manage your licensed resources as you license them. So let's say an Ebsco sales representative comes to you to talk to you about a new Ebsco package. Well, when you license that package, you would go into your Folio ERM, you would turn that package on, you could attach the PDF for your order invoice, you could attach the license or the agreement for that database that you've purchased, and now that you've turned all that on, it shows up in your discovery, it shows up in your A to Z list. You don't have to do it anywhere else. You did it all from the Folio ERM. So there's quite a bit of synergy between Folio and the knowledge base. And then obviously the Ebsco Discovery Service, your linking and your A to Z connect to that knowledge base. So a lot of synergy between the services. So when I look at ERM, it's important to know what is included in ERM. Well, what's included is the ability to manage your agreements, manage your licenses, connect to the knowledge base. That's that e-holdings app on the right. And the eHoldings app obviously includes your publication finder, the A to Z list, your link resolver, and the ability to create settings around that. So how are we connecting? What fields are important in my environment? What does my workflow look like, et cetera, et cetera. There is inclusion of acquisitions apps in ERM. So maybe you want to track an order that you made for that database, where you can track orders, attach invoices, manage your ledgers, all of that kind of stuff within ERM. Oh, and I apologize. The second bullet down on the left, the usage consolidation, what we actually do is we connect Ebsco's usage consolidation service that aggregates counter compliance statistics. It does sushi harvesting, where we'll go out and harvest counter statistics on behalf of the library, and we bring it right into Folio. So if I'm in Folio and I want to see usage data at the point of my agreement, so if I'm managing my license and I'm looking at maybe renewing that Ebsco, I can actually see the counter stat right there. I don't have to go out and do some separate activity. I get to see the usage data right in Folio. So libraries, there's lots of libraries on Folio today, but those that are on ERM are highlighted in yellow. You'll see many of them started ERM. They started there because e-resources make up the lion's share of the library's collection. Yes, your physical collection is important. Yes, the ability to circulate items and manage your users is a core part of the library. But your e-resource pool is also very important. You have a lot of licenses and agreements. Starting there as an ERM tool and then growing into Folio fully is what a lot of these libraries do. And in fact, it's exactly what Cornell did. Cornell started as ERM. They used ERM for about 18 months, and then they grew into Folio full. So with that, I'd like to close and thank you very much for the time spent today. My contact information is below. If you have any questions for me, I'm always happy to be available. Thank you again to the Geo Digital Library in providing this opportunity to discuss. Thank you, Dr. Srikumar, for reaching out to me. I was happy to be here, and I look forward to how the event unfolds. Thanks, everybody.